That's right. All right. So as you can see, take a second here. There's going to be a couple interactives here with the crowd. So if you have a cell phone, you can make your entry here. So just follow the rules at the top. You just text that long string of letters to 22333. What I'm trying to get at is why you would plant a prairie or native plants in your front yard. This is the teacher in me. I would like to know what my students know so that I don't teach below or teach over. I will just warn you from the very beginning that I'm not going to out-funny Deandra because just don't have that much caffeine or humor in me. But anyway, just go ahead and take a few seconds there to do that. This talk is really going to center on kind of this experiment that I started 6 years ago in my front yard to see what would be the reaction if I just put a prairie in the front yard in a regular neighborhood in Houston, and what would people do? And so what I had to think about was, why would I do this? So a lot of times what we do as scientists, and I have the great pleasure of working for the Nature Conservancy now, where we have about 600 conservation scientists around the world, and I get to interact with them, and it's just brilliant, and they call me a conservation scientist. I don't know about all that, but sometimes we scientists like to get into the what's real fast of what we do instead of framing it up on the why. So we're going to start this talk by talking about the why, because when you're putting tall grass prairie back into a city like Houston, your why is probably going to be the reason you succeed or you fail. It's not the what, it is the why. So let's go ahead and take a look. Educate, pollinators, wildlife, really big. All right, I'm looking. People, pretty small. People getting bigger. All right. Man, birds, where'd you come from? Wow, all right. Okay, so we could keep doing this for a long time. And I don't know what Greg's is, but I'm assuming that that's a sage. So anyway, it looks like most of you think, you plant natives in your front yard for kind of traditional reasons, to support birds and wildlife, aesthetics, because they're boring apparently. No, I'm just kidding. They probably split that into two words. For pollinators, some people think for people. That's a good answer. All right, so we're going to get to this presentation. Let's take a look, because I think that when we try to, as native plant enthusiasts or people who work with native plants for a living, we try to get other people to try to do it too, right? To a certain or lesser degree, we're all kind of apostles of native plants, right? How many of you guys have tried to convince other people to plant native plants? Yeah, exactly. So you're out in the community trying to do this, and what I find is that everyone's passion is there, their willingness to go out there and fight the good fight is there, but sometimes the communication vehicles that we use aren't always optimal. And I'm going to start off with two things. One is, I can't solve all your HOA problems. I hate to tell you that. I will tell you about a state law that gives you some protections, and some other resources. But I will tell you the primary, oh no! My phone is disabled for a minute. I have some quotes on there that I need. Anyway, I will tell you the primary thing that you can do to support or protect any native planting in the city is have a damn good story. It's not anything to do with code. It's not anything to do with your HOA covenants. It is a people thing, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. Now, because I'm going to build in a chain of being into this conversation, who was here first does matter. So it has become kind of de rigueur in certain parts of the U.S., and I think it will be here as well, but this is only the second time I've ever doing this, is to recognize the people that were here before all of us were here. And there was just a cool map that came out. If you just type in, whose land are you on, you can come up with this map. And if you take a look at Houston here, and zoom in, you can see that we are today on Rice University's campus. These are the three tribes and bands that were here originally, the Karankawa, the Takapa, and the Santa. So the reason I'm bringing them up is because any piece of property that you're working on, you are the inheritors of those properties from these people who also manage the land. So when we think about land management, we think about modern people, but that's not true. The latest science in this area shows that folks have been here for probably 11,000 years. You are not the first people in your neighborhood, nor are you the first people to manage your neighborhood. So know that your land is a chain of being, and that's going to be important in your storytelling later on. All right, I also want to point out a couple other things. Somebody mentioned something about education earlier. If you want to go to hereinhouston.org, this is a website that is now being run by the Citizens Environmental Coalition Houston. It was started at Katy Prairie Conservancy when I was over there. This is going to be the regional hub for environmental education resources. I think within the next year or so, we have a full-time person working on this to collate everything from the region to make sure that the teachers have what they need to teach. So I want to make sure that you saw that. And then I'll show you a couple other things later on. All right, let's get started. Let's get up here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my front yard. This is my front yard. If you want to know where it is, it's by the Astrodome. It's not in some kind of weird nook where I can hide this. And part of this is that when I was working at Katy Prairie Conservancy, we had one ground rule that could never be violated. We'd get lots of calls for people who wanted us to help them set up pocket prairies. And if they said something like, oh, we got this great space in the backyard, or we got this great space and it's a nook back here and nobody will see it, and we said, nope, can't help you. Good luck. Because part of the reason for doing this is to make these things visible so that they become normalized and so that people can benefit from them, right? So we're going to talk about very visible sites and what you can do to kind of increase your chances of being successful and some of the successes and failures I've met along the way, using my front yard as an example. So I do work for the Nature Conservancy in Texas. A lot of folks don't know that we have been a presence here in Houston for a while, but I just checked our numbers the other day, and we're just closed on a new piece of property earlier this year. And since 1984, we have protected about 85,000 acres in the greater Houston region. Yes. And if you don't know how big 85,000 acres is, because you're human, it's about the footprint of Philadelphia. That's how much room. Now, a lot of that land we don't own anymore because it was a conservation assist and we gave it to somebody, like the National Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So a big chunk of Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge and other parcels of land went to other folks. And we're an international organization. We work in 71 countries in all 50 states. We have about 4,500 people throughout the Conservancy working every day. And what we're working on are 4 big buckets. One is that we're working on sustainable agriculture and fisheries. We're doing some work here in the Gulf. We work on protecting land and water. In Texas, we're really, really close to getting to 1 million acres of protected land. And in the world, about 100 million acres. So we are working steadily. But now we've had a little bit of a shift, and it's a good one, I think. And what we're working on is finding climate solutions and being very pragmatic about that. And then also building healthy cities. So we're in the cityscape. And when I was in school, we were taught in ecology classes that cities were the problem, that people were the problem, and those are sacrifice zones. And the ecologies that are happening in cities are not really important, and they're not really things that real ecologists looked at. What we're finding out is that's not true. There are many reasons to build healthy cities, not only for the people that live there, but for the ecology as well. And so I'm excited that in creating this urban program, what we're really doing is refusing the two communities, the living community that has been here for a long, long time, and the human community, which is very dynamic and diverse, just like the wildlife community, but is a little bit more new. So most people said they plant native plants for wildlife. Well, thank you guys for doing that, because they need it. So this report just came out the other day on birds. How many of you guys saw that report? Pretty humbling. The bird group that really lost the most were the grassland birds, the ones that I really, really admire and are really declining here in the greater Houston area, meadowlark being emblematic of that. So just within my lifetime, 720 million grassland birds have been lost. So about almost 30% of birds in the U.S. have been lost by number, just in my lifetime. That's really humbling. And then, then you start to look at some of these other reports that are coming out, and what you realize is that this false dichotomy, this false silo that we've created between it's good for people, it's good for wildlife, is a false narrative, and it doesn't really work that way. In fact, there was a report. Let me see if I can log in. There we go. So one thing that the UN did a while back was they came out with a report on biodiversity and its loss. And you guys probably saw that report. It said 1 million species might be lost by 2060s. Well, here's the thing about this report that people sometimes missed. So the UN has all of these sustainable development goals that are set in place for a thriving planet, for wildlife and people. And here's the thing, if we lose those 1 million species, of the 44 goals for creating a sustainable planet for people, 35 will be very negatively impacted with the loss of those 1 million species. Biodiversity is not just great on its own, and it should be protected for their inherent value. It is critical if we are to maintain a quality of life that is worth writing home about. So should not be any sacrifice zones on planet Earth in terms of where we think biodiversity, it's okay to not have it. We need it as human beings. So let's just put that plainly and clearly. For health reasons, even if we're just being totally selfish, we need wildlife. We need biodiversity. And so if you ever want to read a really kind of interesting thing, that upper left-hand corner study just came out. And what it does, it documents all these reports on how biodiversity and health, human health, are related, right? And so there's this huge growing body of research that's showing us that link. But that's not the only thing that's happening, right? We have all these streams of crises coming together into this river of issues. One of the things that's really affecting a particular kind of upright mammal right now, us, is we have a lot of issues. One of the issues that we're battling is social isolation. So a lot of health reports are coming out looking at this dynamic between being lonely and bad health effects. So here's the thing that you need to know. Americans today have one less close friend than they did 25 years ago. Well, 25 years ago, you only had 3 close friends. Now you're down to 2, okay? If you look at the depression rates for teens, look at how this is working. Now, do you know what happened in 2008? iPhones. That's what's happened. And so what you have is you have these things coming together. You have biodiversity loss. You have health issues coming into place. You have mental health issues coming into place. So here's what I'm saying. Not only can we not think of any place on Earth being a sacrifice zones for biodiversity, they all need to support some biodiversity. Here's one clear reason: the Houston area. Right now we have a population in the area of about 6.67 million people. In 2035, we're going to have 9 to 10 million people. Well, think about this. How many more yards is that? How many parking lots is that? So every single scrap of land that we have is going to have to carry a larger burden for biodiversity, because we're going to be transforming a lot of the wildness of this area into yards. And if we build them the way that we've built them in the past, that's going to be no bueno for anything, right? So what I'm saying is, after Hurricane Harvey and Imelda this week and all these tragedies that we've had, here's the take-home point. We cannot have lazy landscapes. These landscapes can no longer do one thing. They have to do many things. We call those stacked benefits at the Conservancy, and so do a lot of other folks. They have to do 2, 3, 4, 5 things in one spot. They can't just be for wildlife. They got to be for people, and they got to do other things, right? And so as we design things like the front yard, prairie, and other things, we got to think about all those values. So right now we're looking with our friends at Houston Parks Board at what do we do with these power lines? Can we do more of this stuff, right? So what are the stack benefits here? Well, definitely we'll absorb some more water, right? We don't know exactly how much more, but definitely more. Less pollution in the air, right? Mowers are very, very dirty. One other thing is recreation. So One of the big plans is to use these big corridors that run north-south to connect with the Bayou Greenways project. Well, I'd much rather bike next to this than a mowed easement. I'll tell you that right now. Pollinator support. And because these are not lit at night, these will also be what? Firefly corridors. Okay? A little bit of magic back into the thing. And so what we need to think about is, are lawns like that one? And I'm not dissing Rice, because many of our universities have landscapes like that. But is the cost of those landscapes, particularly if they're not used like that, so high that we need to, as Houstonians, say, we can't afford that anymore. We can't do that anymore because it costs too much, sociologically, economically, and in other ways. It's also a question of this: who has access to nature and how often should they have it? One of the things that we're working on is we're working with the city on the Cities Connecting Children with Nature Plan. And we're heading up the school grounds committee for that. The truth is there are a lot of kids who never get out of the city. And if we don't provide wildness to them where they live every day, it's very unlikely that they will form a conservation ethic to help us move our work forward. And in many parts of our city, nature has been kind of sterilized or eradicated. I was one of those children that never went camping as a child, never went to a state park, never went to a national park. But I grew up in Aldine when it was very wild. And so I spent a lot of time outside. But having worked in a lot of the communities in town, in some of the complete communities, there's a dearth of opportunities for that wildness. So I think that every child has a right to wildness. And so this is another reason why we bring nature back into the middle of the city. So as I work in what's called urban conservation within TNC, other folks like Marion Krasny at Cornell calls this civic ecology. What we're trying to do is we're not trying to pick and choose. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create better habitat. Well, habitat for what? For everything. All simultaneously at once for multiple stacked benefits, with a special emphasis on equity and social justice. So these are some of the things that I deal with on a daily basis. Different from some of the other positions that I've had, then it's much more complicated, and it comes with all the political and economic and racial and equity issues that you can think of. But it's fascinating, and I think what it is it's the future of conservation, where we're melding the old conservation ethic with environmental justice concerns to a new system where we're looking at whole living communities instead of just wildlife or people. So if you want to learn more about that, here are a couple books that are really good at it. Civic Ecology, and then by my colleague here at the Conservancy, Conservation for Cities. But let's get to my yard real quick. So the Great American Lawn. So framing, and thinking about this real quickly, what we need to do is we need to first figure out what is a lawn and how do people perceive it? Because if you don't know that, you are likely to run into problems when you try to put something in your yard, right? So this is a picture from my neighborhood, and I look at this and I don't think beautiful. I think blank canvas is what I think, right? And I also think misuse of resources, right? There is a fabulous video that I don't think I'm probably going to have time, but I would really suggest. It's called The Great American Lawn, and the New York Times put this out. It's maybe 7 minutes long. If we have some time, I'll show it a little bit. But it basically charts the course of the development of the idea of a lawn. And it charts that, and it shows us that basically it's a very aristocratic notion, right? Because at one time, the only people who could afford lawns are folks who could afford to have either low-wage workers or slaves cut their yard for them. It was a status symbol that said, I'm so wealthy, I don't have to I can get other people to do this for me, right? So it started off in a very inequitable way as a symbol. But what it's done is it's taken all these other ideas on, right? It's taken on a morality, right? Lawns are moral landscapes, right? If you don't take care of your yard, you're a what? Slob, bad neighbor, deadbeat, trashy, right? Exactly. It's a very value-laden landscape. People will judge you morally on what you do. I'm just saying, right? So that's kind of weird, but that's where we are. And so what comes up to me is this. What does it mean to be a neighbor? Who are you a neighbor to? And how are we going to have to change what that definition is to get more people to plant better plants? Because we're actually going to have to reframe what a good neighbor means. Is it being a good neighbor to do that to your yard with all the effects and impacts that brings to your other neighbors, or is it better to do something else? Let's take a look. So here's one thing that's very telling, right? Lawns are not about community. In fact, oftentimes they're about breaking community. Stay off my lawn is another way of saying stay away. At a time where we're facing these social cohesion issues, right? Is that being a good neighbor? Is this the best that we can do? How many of you guys grew up going to through people's yards when you were a kid? Yeah. How many of you drank from water hoses that were probably full of rust, like me, right? Did he ever ask for permission to go in those yards? Heck no, you didn't. You just did it. Now, can you do that today? No. Walls, everywhere there are walls, right? There are fences, stay out. So we've gotten to this increasingly kind of fragmented social fabric. How many people in here honestly knows 6 different neighbors in your neighborhood well? How many know everybody on the block well? Yeah, look at that. We've gotten to a weird place. So one of the reasons I did my lawn project is this. I have a 5-year-old, just like Yandra does. She's probably getting about as much sleep as I am. And it really bothered me that he might grow up in a place where he didn't know anybody, that he would be surrounded by strangers, even though it's a neighborhood, and a good neighborhood, right? But that's part of the issue, is that as we do these plantings, it affords us an opportunity to get to know our neighbors. So even though wildlife isn't really critically important and the other things, social cohesion, knowing your people, knowing your neighbors, is one of the outcomes that I wanted to get out of here. Here's another reason that lawns really need to be looked at. Look at these infographics. The average lawnmower spews out about 80 pounds of CO2 every year, and about 34 pounds of other pollutants into the air every year. That's a lot. You add to it that in America, about 70 million pounds of pesticides are used on lawns every year, and about 90 million pounds of fertilizer are used every year. Some of that fertilizer does not get used, or it gets transformed into nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is 300 times per unit stronger at affecting the climate than carbon dioxide. So what I'm going to suggest to you is, in an age of climate change, lawns are one of the most, frankly, destructive things that we can be doing. And I have a lawn, but we'll talk about how I use that lawn. So, but 88% of Americans think that growing a lawn is environmentally friendly. So you have this cognitive dissonance between what's actually happening, the pollution of rivers, carbon dioxide going into the air pollution going into our non-attainment zone here in Houston, and what people think it is because it's green. But as you know, all green is not made the same. Another reason for doing this is I'm broke. No, I'm just kidding. I'm cheap. You see this planting? This looks really cool, and this was made for my yard specifically by my friend Chris Gray years ago. And it has about 50 species. And one day, I will strike the lottery and I'll do this. But I knew I didn't have the money back in 2012, and I still don't have the money. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to put up a temporary prairie. And I'm just going to work my way towards this. So this is what I did. in 4 easy steps. So, mowed the yard very closely, as close as I could get it. Then what I did is I got some growing medium. In this case, it was a mixture of topsoil, little potting soil, because you don't want to use pure potting soil because it gets too dry too quickly, right? You want to mix it with some topsoil. And then I mixed in seeds. So these are approximately kind of a square foot in terms of volume. So I use probably less than 1/8 of a cup of seeds per pile. But think about it this way. The more seeds you put in, the more work you're going to have to do with weeding. Because at some point, if you put in too many seeds, they're going to go right next to each other. You're going to be sitting out there weeding in your yard, and people are going to be looking at you really weird. So don't do that. And I did this across my entire yard. And I'll tell you, the first year that I did this, people like, what in the world? Is this Stranger Things coming to real life or what? Is it upside down under Jaime's house? I don't know what's going on. And then it started to grow. And I had no idea what would happen. I was pretty new to the neighborhood. We just bought the house in 2007 from my wife's grandfather. The people surrounding us had been there for a long time, and they're like, what is up with this person? And so we got flowers. And it was instantaneous, the reaction. I thought, I'm going to be ticketed by the city. No one reported me, and I thought we were scot-free. I started to see people posting pictures on social media. But what was really telling was how neighbors responded. Talked about that fracturing of neighborhood and neighborliness, right? So I'd come home every day, and I'd drive in, and there was always somebody in the front yard, taking pictures, looking at the flowers. But the reaction made me very sad, because as soon as I drove up, what would they do? Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be in your yard. This is your yard. And I would say, no, don't worry about it. That's why I planted it. Wait, really? Yeah, really? Or a little girl or a little boy would come by and pick a flower, and then they'd see me go, oh, I'm so sorry, they picked your flower. I said, no worries. That's why it's there. Really? You're okay with people going in your yard? Yeah. Oh. That's how far we've come as neighbors, that we are now so territorial with these little blocks of land that we just have lost this common bond of the land, right? The concept of the commons has been lost. And so every day when I go over there, I watch BTV, what I call BTV, and I also use this as an opportunity to talk to neighbors. And I will tell you, how many of you guys are introverts? Holy smokes, what's wrong with this crowd? No, I'm just kidding. I'm an introvert too. But I will tell you this, don't do this if you don't want to talk to people. Because you will be talking to people a lot. You will get to know your neighbors, you'll get to know your neighbors' neighbors, you'll get to know a lot of people because people are curious. They will come down the street and it's like boring lawn, boring lawn, boring lawn. What? Every dog is going to be super excited about sniffing your yard, too. But it's a great opportunity to interface with your neighbors. And they will unreservedly just start telling you what they feel about your yard. I have never heard somebody say, mow down those weeds. I've always heard people say, I'm so happy you do this. And now, at this time of the year, if I'm not doing that, people are bugging me. Are you going to be planting the flowers this year? You're the Bluebonnet people. You need to do this, right? So it's become normalized. How much time do I have? Before Q&A?
Before the question and answer period.
Great. So there are a lot of considerations before diving in. One is, I can never make the same prairie twice. Because the rain, as you guys know, comes and goes. The temperatures fluctuate. Some years the bluebonnets are great. Some years they're not so great. So what I would say is plant for diversity, because you don't know what's really going to thrive that year. But I would also say this, and this is just some lessons learned. One is, for a long time I've used a seed mix, and they have that on sale here from Native American Seed called the Ladybird Johnson Legacy Mix. It's great. Classic Texas wildflowers, and they work really well. I'm going to go away from that this year, not because it's not great. It's just some taller species come to dominate in the front. So what I'm going to say is probably single species that are shorter near the front, and then as you get to the back, a little bit taller. And that'll give you a little bit more leeway aesthetically so people's eyes can wander into it before it gets too tall. This last year, I just did a seed mix, and the Coreopsis was like that tall, right near the, right near the road. So I would say single species is probably a little bit better. And this is what happens over the year as it grows up. And I kind of took these little snapshots, not perfect point photos, but it's going to look a little hairy. So here's what you need to do. Make sure to keep a mowed boundary. So if things look too hairy all the way to the curb, it ain't going to work. So, and I know that these aren't the best pictures for that, but you see this mowed edge? Once it starts to get taller, I try to keep that edge mowed pretty well because intentionality is key. If you look at English gardens, where we borrowed lawns from the beginning, they have that sharp edge right next to the wildflowers. Try to keep a sharp edge, no matter what you got. And so what you don't see is all the diversity in there. There's my son, looking grumpy. I don't know what's going on with him. And it's just getting taller. And then as soon as things start to drop their seeds, start to mow sections of it down. You don't want to keep the brown stuff up too long. But, so I'm starting to mow it down. And then I was on a business trip. My wife did that. Yeah. And now it's back and we're playing croquet on it, right? Can't do this all over all of Texas because things don't grow that fast. But literally, I don't mow from October through June, the whole front yard. I just mow that little strip. That's it. So I'm reducing it from about 40 mowings a year to about 8. So in terms of seed mixes and species, I said if you just want to go for a mix, that Ladybird Legacy mix is a really great mix. It's very dependable. It's showy. And here's the thing. You'll never, ever convince somebody to do something if it's not in their value set already. If you try to convince somebody that is not already on your team, it will fail. Don't even try it. So what will make people form this bridge? Well, that bluebonnet. Now, I will tell you that bluebonnet is pretty controversial because some people say it's not native to Harris County. I have a species list that says that it does. I'll challenge anybody. No. But it's a cultural bridge, and it is native to Waller County, one county over if you're a purist. But what it does is it provides them the mental space to latch on to that idea. So with every pocket prairie we do in the city, we put bluebonnets. Because A, there's disturbance species weed that will go away as soon as the rest of the prairie grows in. You don't have to worry about it. 2, is it tells Texans, this is your deal, right? So, use bluebonnets. I will also say, get a sign. If you don't tell people what you're doing, they will fill in the blanks by themselves. You're telling a story either way, but do you want them to tell the story about your yard, or do you want you to tell the story about your yard? That's why I designed this for Native Plant Society years ago, because we needed people to be good apostles, not kind of freelance, I'm just letting weeds grow in my yard apostles, right? So what I did, we recognized the Native peoples that were here. What I did is I created this sign myself, and I got it printed off at Fast Signs for like $30, and I put it in a sign holder from Home Depot that cost about $10. And voila, I got a $40 sign that, if you get a real sign, it's like $1,000. But this lasts. It's made on the same material as like political signs. And those are all pictures from my front yard, all those species in there. So make sure that people know what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it adds to them. High five? Air high five? Oh, 5 minutes? Oh, all right. Here's a sign that I put up in the fall when the prairie's gone. I want people to get normalized with the idea that native plants have a place no matter what the season, even if I don't have a prairie going, right? And I want people to interact with this idea. Somebody came by and could you do that? Can you put up that sign in your yard? I'm like, I think it's political speech. They're like, okay, I don't know. And they just stopped bugging me after that. Another thing we do is we catalog the biodiversity using iNaturalist. I'm a huge fan of iNaturalist. I co-coordinate the regional count for the City Nature Challenge in this region. And you can see all the observations on what we call the Gonzalez Butterwick International Toad Reserve, which is our yard near the Astrodome. And we've cataloged about 103 species. I think there are probably over 200 species, but I start every City Nature Challenge in my front yard. And it's worked out real well in that people can now see kind of a checklist of what's growing there and what's happening there. And it adds to this effort. I will point out again that Houston was first in the USA and third worldwide during this City Nature Challenge. Yes, that's right. And that really fights back about this notion that our nature is lesser. I'm tired of people saying that, oh, the nature here, it's not good. I'm going to go to Austin. Come on, really? Number one in the USA? Right. Go to Austin for the baseball, too. So I can't tell you how many times I catch people, although this is the only picture because I'm usually talking to the people, and it's very awkward to go up and take their picture, where they're coming in, they're reading the sign. Now, as a trained interpreter, I was told very early on, people don't read signs, don't spend much time on them. I can't tell you how many people read the sign. We have a lot of the folks in this neighborhood who are not from this area. They work in the Texas Medical Center. They're from all over Asia, Africa, Europe, other parts of the U.S., and they've come to work here, and they live in this neighborhood because it's proximate. And there are so many people that read that sign. I've been really stunned, and it's really made me kind of rethink what's going on with reading these days in a positive way. These are pictures from my front yard. So we probably have something like, I don't know, maybe we have 15 species. So that's not a real prairie, right? But what it does provide real wildlife habitat value. I've seen a lot of different wildlife there. One thing I will say about connecting with people and talking to them is don't limit it to just signage and talking to them. Invite them to come plant. So I've done that before with my neighbors, where I come and have them stomp the seeds into the ground or make seed balls for the project. I've actually had some friends come over, and I have a friend who's a music therapist, and she actually played lebombo one time as we stomped the seeds into the turf, which was fabulous, and I can't find the darn video, and I had a video of that. And enjoy it, right? So one of the things that my son likes to do is he loves dancing, and he gets that from his dad. We dance a lot in the kitchen together. But that's the thing. I think sometimes we don't take that extra time. We've planted the plants, and we don't sit out there and enjoy them enough, right? But as I'm sitting in the lawn chairs watching my son do this, whatever this dance is, people will come by and talk. And it reminds me of the neighborhood I grew up in Aldine, where people wave, they come by and talk to you. And you're building some of this Texas friendliness back into the equation. That's what we need. No matter what political persuasion you are, we need more of that, okay? So what's next? This is the last one. Power to people, all right? Is I'm going to grow grasses and crops that were really important to this region in galvanized tubs. And I'm going to move them out once they're ready to go to the street curb. I think every child should know what food looks like and fiber plants look like. This is a map from the late 1800s, early 1900s of this area. And this is a really accurate way of seeing what wealth looked like at that time. This is before, a huge amount of oil had flooded the economy. This economy is really based on chopping up nature, cultivating it, and growing stuff and selling it. And so I'm going to be growing rice, I'm going to be growing sugarcane, I'm going to be growing all these different crops, sorghum and everything, because kids don't know where their food comes from. And that is a very odd thing for human beings. For the first time in history, we don't see our food. Weird, right? All right, questions? Hey, almost made it on time.
Good job.
Thank you.
You got applaud
All
for
right.
this gentleman. Okay. Pardon me. Okay, we got our microphones out there. Got one back there
My
first.
first question is, you talked about a state law that you were going to mention later. I need that.
So one thing you should be very proud of the Native Plant Society is they were instrumental in making this law happen. So in 2013, Senate Bill 198 was passed. And basically what it did is it gave some protections from HOAs if you're planting plants that helped with droughty conditions. This is coming on the heels of the 2011 drought. And it's a little bit loose and goosey in terms of its interpretation and everything, but I know of at least 4 people here recently that have brought this to their homeowners association to say, look, no, this is, this goes back to that, am I being a good neighbor by doing this? Yeah, I'm helping to shepherd the state's water resources. I'm helping to clean the air. I'm helping to prevent downstream flooding in my small way. And that's why I was saying about reframing what a good neighbor is. If a neighbor is holding water back from other neighbors, if they're cleaning the air for their neighbors, if they're sequestering carbon for their neighbors, if they're providing opportunities for their children to explore, I think that's what a good neighbor is. Mowing your yard every week, I'm not sure how that helps anybody. So I'm just being honest.
If anybody said I don't think my mic's working, but if anybody said that the state government is not doing something good, this is something good. Just as, like on September 1st, we can now buy beer from our local craft breweries. So it's good all around.
I guess beer started as grasses, right?
There you go.
One other thing that I'll mention that you can do is this. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I will just mention that this November on the ballot, there are 2 state bills, Senate Bill 7 and 8. And those are relating to how we reconstruct this town and what kind of infrastructure, green or gray, we're going to use to do that and where the funding is going to come from. So take a look at Senate Bills 7 and 8. They're very important. And if we go the right way, we'll be able to use some funding for green infrastructure using nature and nature-based solutions.
Wally?
And I would like
There's somebody up here.
I'd like to do something a little bit different, guys. There's a lot of brain power in this audience. You shouldn't just be hearing from me. So if somebody has a good answer to something, I want to hear from you. This is a 360 panel.
You have a question? Wait for this gentleman to come trip over something and get the microphone to you.
Have you gotten any of your neighbors to follow suit and plant a yard like yours?
Have I? Yes. Actually, these little pockets of wildflowers are now springing up all over the neighborhood. Has anybody else in the audience had good luck with planting a front yard planting where they've had neighbors kind of buy in?
I was going to say that. I do the same thing.
She throws seed balls in her yard. Yeah.
Guerrilla
So do I.
gardening.
Yeah.
Guerrilla
gardening. Now, I will tell you that every yard adjacent to my yard also has passion flower vine. Sorry.
Jaime?
Yes.
So did you start with St. Augustine or Bermuda grass, or what do you have as your base layer, and does that stay? And also, do you water? Can you describe the mechanics of what you do?
So I have St. Augustine. I'm not sure how much I would suggest doing it on Bermuda grass because it's so hyper aggressive. It likes to take things over. St. Augustine's pretty easy to use. I don't get rid of the St. Augustine. I just put the soil right on top. I water it. If it's really dry, water it like once a week, on a timer, once or twice a week. But oftentimes the rains are sufficient to get it going. What about Bermuda? I hate Bermuda. I unfortunately, as a restorationist, I usually have to kill Bermuda outright to get anything to grow there. Yep. Iris.
Where's the microphone?
Somebody's got a microphone.
Here, there you go.
I have more of a woodland front yard.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of middle of the road HOA, so they don't.
Lucy, I hear you. There you are. All right.
They don't prohibit things, but they have kind of height requirements.
Right.
And so I'm still in progress, but I've put some like native shrubs to replace the old kind of barren shrubs. And I'm looking at still right now kind of a scalped yard under some trees. So what could you put that's not too high under, that will actually grow under the trees, like with the competition? So you can't really put a prairie.
Ground cover you looking
That's
for?
a great question. Let me click over to the KPC website. So one thing that KPC, along with other organizations, put together is this 9 Natives program. And there's a whole thing on here, a video and a booklet. So if you just type in 9 Natives Katy Prairie, it'll pop up. One thing that we're working with a bunch of folks is a 9 Natives woodland yard concept with Cardinal. We hope that probably by the end of the year we'll have that, so we'll have more alternatives for folks like you.
If you need a demonstration, my yard is under.
There you go. Perfect. There's the invitation. All right.
I'm on the landscape committee of my HOA.
The Randall International Cardinal Preserve. I like it. All right.
Okay, just right up here.
So I was on the City of Houston website and looking at this deal about doing the yard that way, and there was something about like you have to get a permit or something for that kind of landscaping. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's a natural areas permit that you can get through the City of Houston. It's a little known project out of the Houston Parks and Recreation Department. You can get it. Now, what I will say with that is, one of the issues that we have with that is that sometimes there are folks that think that that gives them the reason to just let everything go. Native plants are not about no management, they're about different management. So if you want to be kind to the rest of the native plant folks out here who want to see more native plants, just manage your native plantings well so that they don't become an eyesore and get ticketed, and then it kind of has a spillover effect on other people trying to do good stuff. It's a natural areas ordinance permit.
May I say something real quickly? I actually represented someone for about 3 weeks on a violation of the overgrown yard ordinance, if you will. One thing that the neighborhood enforcement cops really look at is it kind of organized? Are there little artful islands of native plants versus just a big thicket? So you might take that into account too.
Yeah, edges make good friends.
And
Yes.
make good friends, yes.
Yeah, that's it right there. Edges make great friends, but this is a real question. So as we worked on the Houston Climate Plan, which is under review right now, and the Houston Resiliency Plan, here's one thing that's going to have to change. We're going to have to loosen up what we're comfortable with in the city if it's going to respond differently to future storms. We're going to have to let go of this 1950s Ward Cleaver look everywhere, because it's just the world has changed, and the world, the way it looks has got to change if we're going to try to be better. We're just going to have to let go of that.
Okay, we got a microphone over here somewhere.
Okay, that's exactly what I was going to talk to you about. If I live in the suburbs. I live in Houston, but I live in the suburbs, and the people are commuting so many minutes per day that they don't have time to mow their yards. So we have a whole a big portion of our traffic is actually the yard guys. Mm-hmm. So we somehow have, and I have called and complained to my yard guys so many times about their weed eaters hitting my plants. We somehow have to, if we really want to get rid of lawns in this city, we somehow have to incorporate these lawn guys. Because there
Absolutely.
are so many people who do not have time to mow their yard as much as you need to mow it in Houston.
Exactly, and there's a massive equity issue there. Many of those lawn companies are owned by people of color. They're minority-owned businesses. People's livelihoods are at stake. So there's going to have to be some plan for transitioning some of those folks into ecological gardening that won't put them out of a job, right? So we have to keep that into consideration. Yep. Right here. Oh. I'm not picking people, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, I do have 3 lots that in the spring I let grow up. And I finally, because I'm on a committee with the city and knew the city manager in LaPorte, I could say, I promise if anybody complains, I'll mow it down and I'll mow it by the end of May. And so they've quit sending me nasty letters in the spring. But I would like to do something a little more organized. And are there any landscapers in the area that specialize in that? Because it's too big of a project for me to take on by myself. I can't do it. Yeah,
there are a number of landscape architecture companies that now, I don't know if they do it for residential, but certainly for corporate campuses and other things. Osakura Robinson has become known for that. Clark Condon and Associates. You have an amazing designer right behind you, literally. You should have felt that in the force. And I think White Oak Studios maybe does something, but maybe you can ask Tyler. He's like literally right behind you. A lot of talent right there. And a Rice grad, too. Yep.
Wait a minute, get the mic.
I think it's interesting.
Wait a minute. Nobody can hear you.
But
Nobody can hear you.
I
think it's interesting that you're talking about the lawns, because I was watching this documentary recently about Westchester County up in Connecticut, where all the very wealthy people have gone in and they bought these huge estates with these beautiful lawns like the British used to do. And now they have found it is so expensive to maintain those that they're selling, and they can't sell them because nobody wants to buy that and maintain that. So I think that was very interesting about the lawns.
Well, and think about what price we pay for lawns. So every time Harris County Flood Control mows one cycle, it's millions of dollars. Millions. And so they have done a really good job at trying to reduce mowing cycles, and we're working with them on Rice University campus to figure out detention basins. How do we re-prairitize those, or prairitize them for the first time oftentimes, so that they don't have to mow as many detention basins with all the bad impacts and save us money. I feel like a mattress Mac. Prairies will save you money.
So
Yes.
I want to answer the question about Bermuda.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been experimenting because I've moved into a neighborhood where the Bermuda is what is required. And I've been experimenting with natives to replace the Bermuda in some areas. And I'm finding it's working quite well.
Oh, good.
I put out mostly seeds, and I did it in the fall so that they have an opportunity to get started before the Bermuda, which is a warm weather grass, gets active. And as the evening primrose and the gaillardia and the other natives start coming up, then they're shading out the Bermuda, and they're forcing the Bermuda to grow up rather than putting out those runners. And then
Do you weed whack it at that point once it pops up?
Well, once the seed has set, then I weed whack. But I'm also, as those come up, then it's easier to pull up some of the Bermuda as well. So it's really coming along quite nicely. I would recommend it.
Great.
We only have one more question. Oh, right here.
I was just the comment on the yard guys, and I just started my native plant journey a few years ago, and I've had the same yard crew for years. And at first they thought I was crazy, but I'm explaining to them what I'm doing, and they are having more fun. And they were just a yard maintenance company. Now they help me put in beds. They help me plant. They're excited about it.
There you go.
And I think they enjoy it too. And they've gotten very respectful. They do a wonderful job now. So talk to them. It's exciting stuff for them too.
Yep.
Well, we're going to have to cut it off here.
All right.
And really appreciate Jaime Gonzalez for a great talk, as usual.